Hello, friends. Are you watching this alone or with someone? Tell me in the comments.
You ever seen someone gloat so hard you could hear it through their perfume? That's the first thing that popped into my head the second Lana stepped into the kitchen, dragging her designer luggage across the tile like it was a red carpet, laughing on the phone with someone who probably had better cheekbones than IQ points. She didn't even say hello, not really, just waltzed in with a wave that barely brushed the air, reeking of bergamot and entitlement. While I sat in the exact same chair I'd sat in every June 5th for the past 32 years, staring down into a bowl of cereal that had long since gone soggy, waiting for a mother who hadn't remembered what day it was. She was late again. Marianne, my mother, not mom, never mom anymore. Not since she stopped remembering the difference between obligation and affection, had texted me the night before that she'd love to catch up over tea sometime this week. As if I were a neighbor she occasionally borrowed sugar from, not the daughter she gave birth to on the same day every year without fail. The daughter who, 12 months ago, had waited in a restaurant for over an hour with a reservation under celebration while she canceled last minute with a vague excuse about Lana's flight. Lana, always Lana. And now here she was again, fresh off her Paris escapade, bronze and beaming, with hair that probably got trimmed by someone with an accent and teeth so white they looked photoshopped. It was transformational, she sighed dramatically, dumping her cashmere wrap on the chair across from me, her eyes barely acknowledging my presence until they registered the half-empty bowl and wrinkled pajamas. Oh, you're here. That was Lana speak, for I didn't expect you to be here. And now I wish I'd waited 5 more minutes so you'd be gone. I glanced up, but I didn't answer her. There was no point. She wasn't asking anything. Marianne breezed in 5 minutes later, keys jangling in one hand, Trader Joe's bag in the other, her sunglasses still on, and hair pulled back in that elegant, effortless way she always claimed took no time at all. She kissed Lana on both cheeks, a practiced ritual like they were in some European film, then turned toward me with a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I thought we'd do tea later," she said, setting the bag down on the counter and pulling out some herbal blends I didn't recognize, probably gifted by a co-worker or bought for guests she actually liked. "Didn't know you'd already stopped by." I hadn't stopped by. I had texted her 3 days ago, coming over on Wednesday like we said. Let me know what time works. She'd replied with a thumbs up. Today was Wednesday, and it was also my birthday. But of course, neither of them said a word about that. No cake, no card, no cheap balloon from the gas station like when I was a kid, and she still tried, at least until Lana started doing ballet recitals and needed more of everything. I didn't remind her. I hadn't reminded her last year either, or the year before that. You can't force someone to care. You can only wait and see if they will on their own. Lana plopped herself at the table beside me and launched into a detailed retelling of her solo trip to the Louvre, how the light hit the Mona Lisa differently now that she understood real loss, how the cafe outside her hotel served coffee with whipped cream like it was standard. Every sentence was crafted like an Instagram caption, curated, filtered, begging for applause. I let her talk. I let Marianne hover, unpacking groceries, making polite noises at intervals. I let the ache behind my eyes press deeper into my skull without blinking, because even tears would have felt like they demanded something I hadn't earned. It wasn't even about the birthday, not really, not anymore. It was the pattern, the repetition, the quiet rejections dressed up as forgetfulness. The way I'd always been the daughter who was doing okay, and Lana was the one who needed support, even when I was sleeping in my car freshman year because I couldn't get approved for the dorm loan, while Marianne was busy mailing Lana hand-knit scarves to get her through New York winters. Around noon, Marianne clinked a ceramic mug onto the counter. "Tea?" she asked gently, as though this simple gesture could undo 32 years of imbalance. I looked up, startled. "Sure," I said, masking whatever emotion had crept up with a flat smile. She reached for a box of loose-leaf something and added boiling water, her back turned to us. I watched her stir. Her hands shook slightly, or maybe I imagined it. She never looked directly at me when she handed me the mug, only said, peace offering, with a tilt of the head. Thanks, I said. I took the mug, held it between my palms like something sacred. The steam curled upward and hit my face like memory. Then I turned. Lana was still talking about how the Eiffel Tower was smaller than you'd think, but in a chic way. I set the mug down in front of her, casually, deliberately. Here, I said. You should try this. It's good. She blinked, then grinned, as if I'd just handed her a truffle from a Parisian boutique. Finally sharing something with me, she teased, not noticing the twitch in Marianne's jaw behind her. She took the mug, sipped without hesitation. And as the steam rose between us, thick and fragrant and swirling like a question mark that would never quite get answered, I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and waited. Because some gifts you don't keep. Some gifts you pass on. The house didn't change, not really. Still the same beige wallpaper peeling slightly at the corners of the hallway, where no one ever bothered to paint. Still the chipped molding beneath the window by the sink, where Lana once slammed a drawer shut after our last fight and claimed I'd made it stick on purpose. Still the scent of artificial lavender from the plug-in Marianne bought on clearance after Easter, pretending it gave the house a calming energy, when in reality it clashed with everything alive. But there was something different in the air now, not thick exactly, but charged. As if static clung to the walls, waiting for a spark. And even though the day was warm and bright and filled with the sound of birds fighting for a place on the backyard fence, there was a strange hollowness in the kitchen, the kind that makes a person lean forward without realizing it, waiting for something that hasn't been said yet. Lana hadn't noticed. Of course she hadn't. She was still seated across from me, legs crossed with surgical precision, her pedicure visible in some ridiculous sandals she probably bought in a shop that served espresso while you browsed. She was scrolling through her phone now, smiling intermittently at some conversation I wasn't part of, while the steam from the tea spiraled slowly upward in front of her like the last bit of smoke from a match. I watched the mug sit in her hand, as casually as if it belonged there, like it was a harmless object, something to cradle and sip from without thought. And I realized that to Lana, that's exactly what it was, an offering, a compliment, maybe even a kind of victory. She saw me hand her the tea and probably assumed it was a peace gesture, the same way our mother did when she passed it to me, as if words like, I forgot, and I'm sorry, could be replaced by temperature-controlled water and a fancy tea bag from a wooden box. And yet, even as Lana brought it to her lips again, even as her gloss left a faint trace on the rim and she tilted her head back ever so slightly to drink, I felt nothing. No vindication, no rush of adrenaline, not even guilt. Just a deep, bone-tired awareness that this moment, this quiet transaction between women pretending to love each other while secretly keeping score, had been rehearsed 1,000 different ways in my head before it ever arrived in real time. I thought back to a day years ago, sometime in early fall, when I had been 16 and nervous about an exam I hadn't studied for. My stomach twisted with that unique dread only teenagers understand, and I'd made myself a cup of valerian root tea, hoping it would settle my nausea. Marianne had walked into the kitchen, looked at the cup, then at me, and said flatly, "Don't take that stuff unless you want to end up too calm to care when you fail," before tipping the whole thing into the sink without a second thought. I remember how I stared at the wet tea bag clinging to the drain, how her words were somehow worse than any slap would have been, how she walked away humming like she hadn't just dismissed my entire emotional state with a flick of her wrist. And now here we were, years later, and she was the one offering tea as a balm for forgetting my birthday, a gesture so transparent it could have shattered on contact if we'd been less polite. But of course, politeness was the language of our household, where silence filled in for confrontation, and smiles served as substitutions for apologies we never got and never expected anymore. Lana laughed, sudden, loud, the kind of laugh that sounds rehearsed for an audience, and began describing in detail how a waiter at some cafe in Montmartre mistook her for a famous French actress. She told it like a fairy tale, embellishing the punchlines, mimicking his accent in a way that would have gotten anyone else canceled. And at the end of it, she sipped again, Longer this time. I caught the briefest flicker of Marianne's expression from across the room. Not panic, not yet, but something like awareness, attention. Her eyes lingered on Lana's hand as it curled tighter around the mug, and then they flicked to mine. I didn't look away. I didn't even blink. I just tilted my head slightly, curious, almost amused, as if we were both watching the same play unfold, and only I knew the script. It wasn't poison, of course, nothing dramatic like that. I wouldn't give them that kind of closure. I wasn't trying to kill anyone. God, if anything, I wanted them to live long and well and deep inside the slow, irreversible consequences of their own blind preferences. But the tea? The blend Marianne used wasn't just any herbal nonsense. It was a floral mix with ingredients known to interact poorly with certain medications. Ones I knew Lana took regularly, which she had posted about multiple times on social media under hashtags like #mentalhealthmatters and #anxietysquad, not realizing that her efforts to appear vulnerable for likes had provided me with a neatly wrapped list of side effects and contraindications. "Feeling okay?" I asked lightly, finally breaking the silence between us as she leaned back, her smile dimming just a touch. Her fingers tapped the side of the mug. "Bit flushed," she said, brushing her hand across her collarbone, where a red patch was beginning to bloom like a tiny, creeping fire. "Jet lag, probably." Marianne walked over, towel in hand, wiping down a countertop that hadn't needed cleaning in years. Her eyes didn't meet mine, not directly, but her posture changed. A slight stiffness in her shoulders, a longer than necessary pause at the edge of the counter. "Maybe take it slow," she said to Lana, too casually, her voice half a tone higher than usual. "That tea's strong." Lana shrugged, but the air between us thickened like cream left in the sun. She picked up the mug again, held it for a second longer than she should have, then set it down, suddenly uninterested. I could see it now, the slow realization starting to itch at the edges of her comfort. That something was off, not enough to say it aloud, not enough to cause a scene, but just enough to shift the weight in her gut. I stood, stretched my back, and walked to the sink as if everything were normal. As if we weren't all suspended inside a moment so fragile it could shatter if someone so much as breathed the wrong way. I rinsed my own empty mug, set it in the drying rack, and turned back. "Let me know if you want me to make more," I said with a calm that felt like power. And behind me, I heard it. A soft, uncertain cough from Lana. Just one. Not enough to startle anyone, just enough to say that something had begun. It began almost imperceptibly, the way a thunderstorm starts with a change in air pressure, or the way a lie begins unraveling, not with a confession, but with a glance held just a second too long. Lana coughed, just once, and in any other house, with any other family, it might have gone unnoticed, mistaken for a crumb down the wrong pipe or a laugh taken too hard. But in our house, in that moment, that one sound echoed louder than any scream, because beneath the polite quiet that had filled the room since the tea had changed hands, there was a kind of stillness, a watching, a collective awareness that the curtain had just shifted, and we were no longer in a safe scene. She tried to ignore it at first. Of course she did. Lana didn't like when attention shifted toward her unless she had orchestrated it, unless she had framed the story and scripted the compliments in advance. She swallowed hard, her jaw clenching slightly as she reached for her water, that obnoxious insulated bottle with the stickers from all the places she'd visited, most of which she hadn't actually enjoyed, but insisted on romanticizing for social proof. Her hand was steady, but only barely. Another cough came, sharper now, and her eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in suspicion, as if she was trying to locate the cause of something that didn't make sense in her carefully curated world. Her gaze drifted to the tea, still half full, then flicked towards me, just briefly, like a dog testing whether something was edible or dangerous. I didn't move. I didn't smirk. I didn't lean forward or tilt my head or perform the satisfaction she probably expected from someone who had supposedly always been bitter. No, I stayed still, composed, quiet, the way you sit during a job interview, waiting for someone to acknowledge your resume. She blinked twice. The color in her face, normally that soft, peachy beige that matched every one of her foundation swatches, had begun to shift. First around the temples, then at the edges of her cheeks, blotchy patches blooming like bruises beneath the surface. Her lips, always perfectly moisturized, parted slightly as she breathed in, sharp and quick. A breath that didn't land quite right. Marianne noticed it then. I saw the moment she registered it, not in her voice or her face because Marianne had trained herself never to flinch, not even when Dad left, not even when the mortgage letters came in pink envelopes, but in her posture, in the way her hands stopped moving, in the way her eyes darted between Lana's pale knuckles and the mug on the table like someone trying to read subtitles in a foreign language they barely understood. "Lana," she said softly, her tone too smooth, too rehearsed, like she was talking to a client in her HR office and not her favorite daughter whose skin was suddenly flushed with something more than heat. "I'm fine," Lana croaked, but her voice didn't match her words. It cracked in the middle, thin and dry, like a ribbon fraying under pressure. "It's just, my chest feels weird. I think maybe the altitude or jet lag." "Jet lag doesn't do that," I said calmly, not mocking, not gleeful, just stating it the way you'd tell someone that the stove is hot while watching them inch closer anyway. Her hands, those long, slender fingers that had once played piano while I watched from the doorway, began to tremble. Not violently, but just enough that the remaining tea in the cup shivered slightly as she tried to lift it again, thought better of it, and set it down. Marianne stood fully now, stepping toward her slowly, like movement might provoke something worse. "Maybe you should sit back," she said, her voice coated in caution. "I am sitting," Lana snapped, though there was fear now, just below the surface, still buried, but cracking through. "I just need a second." It was then, just then, that I saw the smirk drop. That permanent, self-assured little smile she wore like a coat of armor in every room, the one that said she was untouchable, that she would always be the favored one, the exceptional one, the glittering prize while I was the obligation. That smile vanished, peeled off like sunburnt skin, leaving behind something raw and unfamiliar. Her breath came faster now, uneven, and her hand gripped the edge of the table with the desperation of someone trying to anchor herself against an invisible tide. Marianne leaned closer, reaching out, then hesitated, her hand suspended midair, like she didn't know whether to touch her or pray. "Is it your medication?" I asked. Not innocently, but not accusatorily either, just a quiet needle slipping into the thread of panic. Lana turned her head toward me, and in her eyes I saw the first real question. Not confusion, not accusation, but question. "Did you?" I didn't answer it. Not aloud, not with a word or a movement or a glance. I simply looked back, calm and open, the way you look at someone who's finally starting to understand a language you've been speaking your whole life. The silence that followed was thick, pregnant with all the things we'd never said, the slights we never acknowledged, the birthdays ignored, the achievements minimized, the grief dismissed. It hung there in the air with the scent of oversteeped tea and designer perfume beginning to sour under her sweat. Then came the sharp inhale, the real one, the one that caught in her throat and didn't leave. Her eyes widened, hand flying to her chest, and Marianne gasped in a way I'd never heard from her, as if she too had forgotten how fragile things could become when you ignored the cracks long enough. "Lana," she whispered, and this time her voice broke. "I can't," Lana rasped. Something's wrong." Panic flashed now, visible and raw, and Marianne turned to me, fully, her face no longer composed but cracked at the edges, the mask slipping for the first time in years. "What did you do?" she asked, and her voice wasn't angry, it was scared. It was that small, terrified voice of someone who suddenly realizes they might have misjudged the quiet one in the room. I stared at her, let the questions settle between us like a blade, and then I smiled. Not widely, not cruelly, but the way you smile when someone finally reads the writing that's been etched into the wall for years. I just passed on your gift, I said softly, and with that the room fell silent again, save for the labored breathing of a sister who'd finally taken a sip of everything she'd never tasted. Doubt, fear, and maybe, just maybe, the consequence of never looking behind her. The ambulance arrived too quickly and not quickly enough, its siren slicing through the hum of the suburban afternoon like a scalpel drawn down the center of a lie, exposing the raw and inconvenient truth beneath the tidy facade we had all so carefully maintained. Lana, pale and dazed, was half carried, half wheeled out on the gurney, her limbs jerking with an involuntary tremor that it made her look, for the first time in her life, utterly human, small, fragile, and terribly alone. The paramedics moved with professional detachment, one speaking calmly into a radio, while the other adjusted the oxygen mask over her face. But even in their efficiency, I caught it, the flicker of concern, the glance exchanged between them that said, "This doesn't look right. Something's missing here," like a puzzle that had been tampered with before they arrived. Marianne followed closely behind them, clutching her purse like it held something more than expired coupons and lip balm. Like it could somehow anchor her in the middle of a reality that was cracking open at the seams. She didn't look at me when she left, didn't say a word, didn't ask if I was coming, and I didn't offer. I simply stood in the hallway, watching the shadow of her silhouette shrink down the front walk, hearing the door close behind her with the kind of finality that doesn't require a lock to keep someone out. The house, once emptied of its golden child and her keeper, became almost unrecognizably quiet. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but unnaturally still, like the breath had been pulled from its lungs, and the furniture remained as though waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, the same one where Lana used to drape herself like a starlet between auditions, and stared at the mug she had left behind on the table, a faint lipstick stain still marking the rim, the tea inside cold and untouched since her final sip. I didn't reach for it. I didn't move it. I just looked at it the way one might look at the last page of a diary, private, irreversible, and written in ink too dark to erase. I stayed there for a long time enough for the light to shift across the hardwood floor and the hum of the refrigerator to become the loudest sound in the room. I didn't call anyone. I didn't open my phone. I didn't pace or cry or rehearse what I might say when the police inevitably showed up. Because they didn't. No knock came. No questions, no demands, no flashing lights or clipboards or tight-lipped officers trying to figure out where the chain had broken. Just absence. When Marianne returned 3 hours later, the front door creaked open like an apology and shut just as softly behind her. Her heels clicked once on the tile. Before she paused in the entryway, the silence wrapping around her shoulders like a wool coat in July. I turned my head slowly, not rising, not speaking, just observing. She walked into the kitchen like someone stepping into a room that might collapse under their weight, her eyes sweeping over the counter, the chairs, the table where the mug still sat in quiet testimony. "She's fine," she said finally, the words dropping like coins into a well, metallic and distant. They ran tests. Her heart rate was elevated, her blood pressure was unstable. They said it was a combination of stress and medication. They're calling it an adverse reaction. I nodded once, not surprised, not moved. "That blend you used," I said, almost conversationally, as if we were discussing cake recipes or what time the mail comes. "It has passion flower, right? And lemon balm?" She flinched, not visibly, not in the way most people would, but I knew her well enough to spot the subtle recoil, the twitch of a brow, the way her lips pressed together just a little too firmly. "It was the one from the gift basket," she replied, her voice strained but calm. "The organic one. I didn't think it would—" "You didn't think," I interrupted gently. Not accusing, not loud, just firm. "That's the whole problem, isn't it?" Her eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not fear, but something more dangerous, recognition. Not that I had done something wrong, but that I had done something she understood, that I had, in a way, become the very reflection she had spent years refusing to acknowledge in herself. We didn't speak for a long time after that. She moved around the kitchen quietly, putting things away that didn't need putting away, adjusting the fruit bowl, wiping crumbs that didn't exist, all the while casting glances at the mug that remained untouched on the table, the ghost of Lana's moment lingering in the room like a smell you can't wash out. I knew she wouldn't ask me outright, not what I had done, not why I had done it, because she already knew, not the specifics, not the science, but the shape of it, the intention behind it, the way a child learns how far a parent's neglect can bend them before it breaks into something cold and deliberate. She left the room first, retreating upstairs without saying goodnight, and I didn't follow. I remained in the kitchen, my hands folded neatly in my lap, staring out the window at the darkening street, watching the lamplight flicker on like an eye-opening just in time to miss everything important. That night, I locked the door to my old bedroom. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted her to hear the click. I wanted her to lie in bed and wonder what had changed in the girl she had forgotten to celebrate, year after year, in the sister she had let drift further away with every favor, every shrug, every next time. I wanted the silence to echo between us the way it had echoed in me for decades. And I wanted her to feel it not as absence, but as presence, sharp and unmistakable. In the morning, we passed each other in the hallway without a word. She made coffee, not tea, and I smiled. It's a strange thing, the way life reorders itself after something that should have torn everything apart, but instead leaves the furniture right where it was, the photographs still smiling from the walls, and the breakfast table waiting as if no one had ever gasped for air across it. Days passed in a silence so well rehearsed it could have been written into the walls. The kind of silence that doesn't scream or shatter plates or demand explanations, but simply waits. Heavy, unmoving, thick with the understanding that something irreversible has happened. And yet we are all, in our own practiced ways, pretending that nothing has changed. Lana returned home after 2 days in the hospital, walking slower than usual, her complexion a few shades paler than her typical dewy glow, her voice a touch more subdued, as though something deep inside her had been slightly rearranged. But not destroyed. No, not her. She was still Lana, still the center of any room she entered, still draped in soft cashmere and careful affectation, still glancing at herself in mirrors when she thought no one was looking. And yet she didn't mention Paris anymore. Not once. Not the boutiques, not the food, not the life-changing spiritual awakening she had posted so breathlessly about. Instead, she talked about simple things, how the air in the hospital smelled like bleach and regret, how nurses spoke to her like she was 5 years old, how she wished someone had brought her better socks. She didn't ask what had been in the tea, and I didn't offer. We both knew the rules. You don't ask questions if you're not prepared for the answers. Marianne, for her part, became a ghost in her own home. She moved through the rooms like someone renting space in a life she no longer trusted, her footsteps muffled, her voice even softer than usual, as if any sudden movement might cause something to shatter. She didn't cook as much. She didn't suggest tea. She stuck to coffee, black, bitter, no cream, and drank it like medicine, like penance. I caught her once late at night, standing by the kitchen sink with the lights off, staring out the window as though trying to see a version of herself that had existed before all of this, before daughters had expectations and tea had consequences. She didn't speak to me that night, but when she turned and saw me standing there, her eyes lingered on mine for just a moment too long, and I could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing against the silence between us like fingers against glass. I never told her what was in the tea, not because I was afraid she'd confront me. She wouldn't. But because it didn't matter. Whether it had been the herbs themselves, or the interaction with Lana's medication, or simply the pressure of decades of unspoken resentment steeping inside that cup, The truth was not in the ingredients. The truth was in the choice. And choices, once made, don't require confession. They speak for themselves. People always assume that revenge is loud, that it arrives with shouting and accusations and broken things. But in real life, the most satisfying revenge is the kind that walks in quietly, takes a seat at the table, and waits until everyone else realizes the meal has already been served. It doesn't need to scream to be heard. It simply needs to be undeniable. Weeks passed. No one brought up my birthday. No one apologized. No one even hinted at it. And still, every interaction after that day carried a new weight, a hesitation, a subtle choreography, where everyone danced a little more carefully around me. The jokes were gentler, the dismissals shorter, the eye contact longer. Even Lana, who once rolled her eyes like it was her second language, now watched me the way you watch a street dog, not out of pity, but out of caution, because you can never be sure what it knows or how close you can get before it bites. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the house again, a rare moment when both of them were out, Marianne at her book club, Lana at some spa appointment she described with the hollow enthusiasm of someone who no longer trusted her own stories. I wandered into the kitchen, letting the silence press against my ribs like a warm, weighted blanket, and opened the tea drawer. It was all still there, the same neat rows of carefully selected blends, each one promising calm or clarity or healing, as though words on cardboard could undo the things people refuse to say. My fingers hovered over the box she had used that day, an elegant little package with cursive writing and gold accents, a product designed for women who drink self-care like a badge of honor. I picked it up, turned it over, scanned the ingredients again, slowly, like reading a familiar passage in a book you never truly understood, until it aligned with your life in a terrifyingly perfect way. Lemon balm, passion flower, chamomile, nothing toxic, nothing illegal, just a few pretty plants that didn't mix well with certain prescriptions, just a few choices that someone didn't think through. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt awake. I put the box back carefully and turned to the kettle, filled it with water, clicked it on. As the soft hum of heating metal filled the space, I looked out the window, past the garden that had long gone wild from neglect, past the fence that needed repainting, toward the empty street. There was something beautiful in the stillness, something liberating in the fact that nothing needed to be said anymore. The truth had already bloomed between us, thorned and rooted, and now we each tended to our own side of the garden, careful, cautious, and fully aware of what could happen if we reached across again without gloves. The kettle clicked off. The water was ready. I stood there for a moment longer, hands on the counter, breathing in the steam. Some people keep the past in photo albums. Some bury it in therapy sessions they never complete. Me? I keep it in the tea drawer, where it belongs, not because I need it, but because they might forget again.